The sound of the slap wasn't physical. It was the deafening silence that followed the insult. In the gilded ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria, Perry Stratford stood with a champagne flute in hand, sneering at the woman he had discarded 3 years ago. He had just loudly declared to the city's elite that she was irrelevant, a ghost from a life he had outgrown. He expected her to crumble. He expected her to run. Instead, the heavy oak doors swung open, silencing the room. The world's most elusive billionaire walked in, bypassed the titans of industry, and fell to one knee before the nobody. Perry's glass shattered on the floor. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Le Bernardin, blurring the lights of Midtown Manhattan into streaks of grey and angry gold. It was a fitting backdrop for the end of a 10-year marriage. Perry Stratford checked his reflection in the darkened window. At 34, he was the picture of corporate ascension, a bespoke navy suit from Savile Row, hair styled with military precision, and a jawline that he believed was destined for magazine covers. He looked at the woman sitting across from him, Meredith. She was stirring her Earl Grey tea. Her shoulders hunched slightly, wearing a beige cardigan that Perry had always detested. It looked like something a librarian would wear to a funeral. It looked, in a word, cheap. "Are you listening to me, Meredith?" Perry asked, his voice smooth, lacking any jagged edges of remorse. Meredith looked up. Her eyes, a soft hazel, were tired. "I'm listening. Perry, you're saying you've outgrown me." "That's a crude way to put it. But yes," Perry said, reaching for his water glass. "Look, we had a good run. University sweethearts. You supported me through the MBA program at Wharton. I acknowledge that. But look at where I am now. I'm a senior VP at Helix Capital. I'm handling mergers that reshape economies. I need a partner who... Projects what? Exactly?" Meredith asked quietly. "Power, ambition, visibility," Perry snapped, his patience thinning. Meredith, you're content with your little antique book restoration business. You smell like old paper and dust. I need someone who smells like Chanel No. 5 and ambition. I have dinners with senators. I have galas. When you walk into a room, nobody turns their head. In my world, if you aren't noticed, you don't exist." He pulled a thick manila envelope from his briefcase and slid it across the white tablecloth. "The settlement is generous. I'm buying you out of the apartment. I'm leaving you the Honda. I just want a clean break. No drama, no crying." Meredith didn't touch the envelope. She stared at him, really seeing him for the first time in years. She saw the insecurity masked by the expensive watch. She saw the boy who used to cry about his father's approval now turning into the very man he hated. "You think I'm a nobody because I don't beg for attention," Meredith said, her voice steady. Perry laughed, a short, sharp bark. "I think you're a nobody because in this city you are a nobody. Meredith, you restore old books for museums. I build skylines. It's simple biology, survival of the fittest. And frankly, you're extinct." He stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Sign the papers. Brittany is waiting for me." "Brittany," Meredith repeated, the 22-year-old intern. "Of course." "She has fire," Perry said, checking his phone. "She has a future. Goodbye. Meredith, try to find someone. Manageable. Someone in your league. Maybe a high school teacher." He walked out of the restaurant without looking back. He didn't see Meredith signal the waiter. He didn't see the calm, terrifying resolve that settled in her eyes. He didn't see her pull out a black titanium credit card, the kind that requires an 8-figure balance just to qualify to pay for the tea he had left untouched. Perry Stratford thought he had just discarded a liability. He had no idea he had just declared war on the bank. 3 years later, the air in the boardroom of Helix Capital was thin, recycled, and smelled of desperation. Perry Stratford sat at the head of the mahogany table, tapping a gold fountain pen against a leather notebook. He was older now, the lines around his eyes a little deeper, the grey at his temples carefully dyed back to brown. "Talk to me," Perry barked at his team. "The Kovo merger is stalled," a junior analyst named Greg said, sweating through his shirt. "Stefan Kovo he's impossible." "Perry, he's rejected the last 3 offers. He says our due diligence is pedestrian." Perry slammed the pen down. "Pedestrian. We are offering him $4 billion for his logistics grid. The man is a ghost. He hasn't been seen in public in 5 years. He runs his empire from a yacht in the Mediterranean or a bunker in the Swiss Alps. Nobody knows. How are we supposed to close a deal with a phantom? He's coming to New York," Greg said, his voice trembling. The room went silent. Stefan Kovo. The name was whispered with a mixture of reverence and fear on Wall Street. He was a man who had started with shipping containers and now owned the infrastructure of half the digital world. He was a billionaire several times over, a man who could crash a currency by sending a tweet, and he was notoriously private. When Perry demanded, "Tonight," Greg said, "the Azure Gala. It's a charity auction for historical preservation at the Pierre Hotel. Rumor is, Kovo is the primary donor. He's coming out of hiding to vet potential partners personally." Perry stood up, a predatory grin spreading across his face. This was it. This was the moment that would catapult him from a wealthy executive to a titan. If he could corner Kovo, if he could charm him, the merger would go through. Perry would make $50 million on the closing bonus alone. "Get me a ticket," Perry ordered. "Tickets are $50,000 a plate, and they're sold out," Greg stammered. "I don't care who you have to bribe, threaten, or fire," Perry hissed, leaning over the table. "Get me into that room, and get Brittany ready. She needs to look like royalty." That evening, the Pierre Hotel was a fortress of light and security. Paparazzi lined 61st Street, their flashbulbs popping like fireworks as limousines deposited the gods of New York society. There were movie stars, tech moguls, and old money families, the Vanderbilts, the Astors, the leftovers of the Gilded Age mixing with the sharks of the New World. Perry stepped out of a black Maybach, adjusting his bow tie. Brittany hung on his arm, draped in a red dress that was perhaps a shade too bright, a cut too low for the conservative crowd. But she was stunning. She looked expensive. That was all that mattered. "God, look at this crowd," Brittany whispered, chewing her gum slightly before swallowing it. "Is that Anderson Cooper?" "Keep your voice down," Perry muttered, smiling for the cameras. "And stand up straight. We are hunting tonight." They swept past the security checkpoint, Perry flashing the digital invitation that had cost the firm favors they would be repaying for a decade. The grand ballroom was a sea of flowers and diamonds. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Perry scanned the room, his eyes darting over faces, dismissing anyone who couldn't help him. He ignored the actors and the models. He was looking for power. He was looking for Stefan Kovo. "Perry," a booming voice called out. It was Roger Thorne, a competitor from Goldman. Didn't think you made the cut for this list. Roger. Perry nodded coolly. We have interests in preservation. Do you? Roger laughed. I heard Helix is trying to buy Kovo's logistics arm. Good luck. The man eats VPs for breakfast. They say he values authenticity above profit, whatever that means. I can handle your eccentric billionaire, Perry said. I handled the merger with T-Mobile. Didn't I? This isn't T-Mobile. Perry, Roger said, his smile fading. Kovo is different. He's old-school European. He cares about lineage, history, things you can't buy. Perry scoffed as he walked away. Everything could be bought. It was just a matter of price. He grabbed a glass of champagne and turned toward the center of the room, where a display of auction items was set up. There were rare paintings, jewels, and manuscripts. And then he saw her. She was standing near a glass case containing a 17th century navigational chart. She was wearing a dress of slate-grey silk, high-necked, long-sleeved, with an open back that hinted at a subtle, elegant sensuality. Her hair was pinned up in a complex chignon, held in place by a single, dull silver pin. It was Meredith. Perry blinked. Sure, he was hallucinating. Meredith didn't go to galas at the Pierre. Meredith went to book clubs in Queens. Meredith clipped coupons for cat food. He felt a surge of irrational anger. What was she doing here? Had she snuck in? Was she working? He looked closer. She wasn't holding a tray. She wasn't wearing a headset. She was holding a catalogue, speaking softly to an elderly man who Perry recognized as the curator of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The curator was listening to her with rapt attention. "Who is that?" Brittany asked, following his gaze. "She looks intense. Is she somebody?" "She's nobody." Perry spat, the old venom rising instantly. "She's my ex-wife." Brittany's eyes widened. "The librarian, the one you said was a drag." "The very same." Perry handed his glass to Brittany. "Stay here. I need to handle this. If Kovo sees me talking to the help or some gate crasher, it ruins the image." Perry marched across the room, his polished shoes clicking on the marble. He cut through a group of socialites, not caring if he jostled them. He approached Meredith from behind. "I didn't realize they were hiring temps for the event staff tonight," Perry said, his voice loud enough to carry to the nearby guests. Meredith froze. She finished her sentence to the curator. "The ink composition suggests a Venetian origin." "Doctor." Finch gave a polite nod and slowly turned around. Her face was calmer than he remembered. The tiredness was gone. Her skin glowed, but she still looked plain to him. No diamonds, no flash, just that grey dress. "Hello, Perry," she said. Her voice was cool water. "What are you doing here, Meredith?" Perry demanded, stepping into a personal space. "This ticket costs more than you made in a decade. Did you sleep with a caterer, or are you here to beg me for more alimony?" A few heads turned. The curator, Dr. Finch, looked affronted. "Excuse me, sir." "It's fine, Arthur," Meredith said, raising a hand to silence the older man. She looked at Perry with a pity that infuriated him. "I'm here for the auction." "Perry, same as you." Perry laughed, a cruel, incredulous sound. "The auction?" "Meredith, the opening bid on that map is $200,000. You drive a 2018 Honda. Let's not play pretend. You're embarrassing yourself." "I think you should lower your voice," Meredith said softly. "You're drawing attention." I want attention, Perry declared, gesturing to the room. I belong here. I earned my place. You're a leech. You probably found out I was coming and wanted to ruin my night. Well, it won't work. I'm closing the biggest deal of my life tonight, and I won't have my drab, pathetic ex-wife hovering around like a bad smell. Brittany had sauntered over, linking her arm through Perry's. She looked Meredith up and down with a sneer. So this is her. She looks like a school marm. She's leaving, Perry said. He leaned in close to Meredith, his breath smelling of expensive alcohol and rot. Get out, Meredith. Before I call security and have you dragged out, you're a nobody. You've always been a nobody. Go back to your dusty books and leave the real world to us. Meredith didn't flinch. She looked at Brittany, then back at Perry. There was no anger in her eyes anymore, just a strange, heavy finality. I'll leave when I'm ready. Perry, she said. You'll leave now, Perry shouted, losing his composure. Suddenly, the music stopped. The chatter in the room died down instantly, like a candle snuffed out in a storm. At the top of the grand staircase, a hush fell over the crowd. The double doors had opened. A man stood there. He was in his 60s, with a mane of silver hair and a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. He had an aura of absolute, unshakable authority. He carried a cane topped with a black diamond, but he didn't seem to need it. It was Stefan Kovo, the billionaire, the target. Perry forgot about Meredith instantly. His heart hammered in his chest. This was it. Stay here, he hissed to Brittany. And you! He glared at Meredith. Don't you dare move. I'll deal with you after I introduce myself to Mr. Kovo. Perry straightened his tie, fixed his cuffs, and prepared to make the walk that would define his career. He took a step forward, ready to intercept the billionaire as he descended the stairs. He composed his opening line, Mr. Kovo, Perry Stratford, Helix Capital, I admire your vision. Stefan Kovo descended the stairs, his eyes scanning the room. He didn't look at the models. He didn't look at the politicians. He didn't look at Perry, who was practically waving. Kovo walked straight past Perry. He didn't even blink at him. It was as if Perry was made of glass. Perry turned, confused, watching the billionaire march with purpose across the floor. Where was he going? Who was more important than the Helix deal? Kovo stopped. He stopped directly in front of the grey dress. He stopped in front of Meredith. The room held its breath. Perry watched, his mouth slightly open. As the most powerful man in global logistics, a man known for his icy demeanor, broke into a warm, genuine smile. Meredith, Stefan Kovo said, his voice deep and carrying through the silent ballroom. You are impossible to get a hold of. And then, to Perry's absolute horror, the billionaire took Meredith's hand, bowed low, and kissed her knuckles with a reverence reserved for queens. The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute. It was the kind of silence usually reserved for the reading of a verdict in a capital murder trial. Perry Stratford stood frozen, his mouth slightly ajar, his brain misfiring as it tried to process the impossible image before him. Stefan Kovo, a man who owned shipping fleets, satellites, and entire swathes of the Swiss banking system, was still holding Meredith's hand. He wasn't letting go. Mr. Kovo, Perry stammered, his voice cracking. He took a step forward, his survival instinct kicking in. He had to correct this. This was a misunderstanding. I think you have the wrong person. This is just Meredith. Stefan Kovo slowly straightened up. He turned his head, looking at Perry with the mild annoyance one might feel toward a buzzing fly. "Just Meredith," Kovo repeated, his accent thick with the gravel of Eastern Europe. He looked at Meredith, raising an eyebrow. "Is this man a comedian you hired for the evening, ma chérie?" Meredith smiled, a genuine warm smile that Perry hadn't seen in years. "No, Stefan. This is Perry Stratford, my ex-husband." Kovo's eyes narrowed. The warmth vanished instantly, replaced by a glacial stare that had made Prime Ministers sweat. He looked Perry up and down, dissecting him. "Ah, the ex-husband. The one who outgrew her. Yes, I recall the story." Perry felt a cold bead of sweat roll down his spine. Meredith had talked to Kovo about him, when how Mr. "Kovo," Perry said, straightening his tie, trying to salvage the situation with corporate bravado. "I'm a senior vice president at Helix Capital. We've been trying to reach you regarding the logistics merger. I assumed, well, seeing you with Meredith, I assumed you were being charitable to the staff." The gasps in the room were audible. Brittany, standing next to Perry, took a small step away from him, sensing the radioactive levels of social suicide occurring. Kovo laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was dry and terrifying. "Charitable." Kovo stepped closer to Perry, looming over him. "You differ from your reputation, Mr. Stratford. My analysts described you as sharp. You seem remarkably dull." Kovo gestured to Meredith. "You call her staff. You call her a nobody. Do you know who restored the scorched pages of the Library of Alexandria, archives recovered in 1998? Do you know who identified the forgery in the Romanov collection that saved my foundation $40 million? Perry blinked. She fixes old books. She is the foremost paleographer and archival historian in the Western Hemisphere, Kovo thundered, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. When the Vatican secret archives have a document they cannot decipher, they do not call Oxford. They do not call Yale. They call Meredith Holloway. Kovo turned back to Meredith, his demeanor softening instantly. I have been trying to get on her calendar for 6 months. Mr. Stratford, I flew here tonight not for your logistics merger, but because Meredith finally agreed to consult on my private collection in Geneva. I am here to beg her to take my money, not to give you any of mine. Perry felt the blood drain from his face. The room was spinning, the antique book business he had mocked. The dusty papers. Meredith. Perry whispered, looking at her. Meredith took a sip of champagne from a passing tray. She looked regal. I told you, Perry, I don't beg for attention. I earn respect. There is a difference. But the money, Perry stammered. The settlement. You took the Honda. You live in Queens. I like Queens. Meredith shrugged. It's quiet. And I didn't fight you for the assets because I didn't need them. I didn't want your money. Perry, I have my own. She has her own. Kovo chuckled, shaking his head. She is the only person I know who bills $4,000 an hour and still drives a 10-year-old car because she likes the suspension. The crowd rippled with laughter, not at Meredith, but with her. They were laughing at Perry, the titans of industry, the socialites. The people Perry had spent his entire life trying to impress were looking at him with pity and disdain. Now, Kovo said, dismissing Perry with a wave of his hand. Run along, little man. Go play with your spreadsheets. The adults have business to discuss. Kovo offered his arm to Meredith. Shall we view the catalogue? Meredith, I am told Lot 45 is of particular interest. We shall. Stephen, Meredith said, hooking her arm through his. They walked away, leaving Perry standing alone in the middle of the ballroom. He felt naked. His expensive suit felt like a costume. Brittany leaned in, her voice hushed. So, does this mean we aren't sitting at the head table? Shut up, Perry hissed, his hands trembling. Just shut up. He watched them go. He should have left. He should have run out the back door and never looked back. But Perry Stratford was a man driven by ego, and his ego had just been set on fire. He couldn't leave. He had to fix this. He had to prove he was still a player. He looked toward the stage where the auctioneer was taking the podium. Lot 45, he muttered to himself. What the hell is Lot 45? He pulled out his phone and frantically scrolled through the digital catalogue. Lot 45, the Cavendish Journal, a newly discovered maritime log from the 16th century, detailing previously unknown trade routes in the East Indies, authenticated by M. Holloway. Opening bid $500,000. Perry's eyes narrowed. Kovo wanted this. Kovo had practically drooled over it. If Perry couldn't charm Kovo, he would leverage him. He would buy the journal. He would buy the one thing the billionaire wanted. And then he would hold it hostage until Kovo signed the Helix merger. It was aggressive. It was dangerous. It was exactly the kind of alpha move his mentors at Helix preached. He checked his company credit limit. It was authorized for strategic acquisitions up to $5 million. Game on, Perry whispered. The auction began with a flurry of smaller items, vintage wines, a diamond necklace, a trip to space on a private rocket. Perry ignored them all. He stood near the back, drinking whiskey straight, his eyes locked on the back of Stefan Kovo's head. Meredith was sitting next to the billionaire, whispering in his ear. Every time she whispered, Kovo nodded solemnly. It drove Perry mad. She was his wife. She was the woman who clipped coupons. How was she suddenly the advisor to the gods? Ladies and gentlemen, the auctioneer announced, his British accent cutting through the chatter. We now come to the highlight of the evening. Lot 45. The Cavendish Journal. Two handlers in white gloves brought out a velvet pillow. On it sat a tattered, leather-bound book. It looked like garbage to Perry. It looked like something you'd find in a damp basement. This item is unique, the auctioneer continued. A lost piece of history. We will start the bidding at $500,000. 500,000, a voice called out from the front row. It was the CEO of a rival tech firm. 600, another voice shouted. Perry waited. He watched Kovo. The billionaire sat still, his paddle resting on his knee. 700,000, the auctioneer sang. Do I hear 8? 1 million, Perry shouted, raising his paddle high. Heads turned. $1 million was a jump. It was a statement. Kovo turned around in his seat. He looked at Perry, his expression unreadable. Then, he leaned over and whispered something to Meredith. Meredith glanced back at Perry. She didn't look impressed. She looked amused. 1 million to the gentleman in the back, the auctioneer said. Do I hear 1.2? 1.5, Kovo said calmly, not even raising his paddle, just lifting a finger. 1.5 to Mr. Kovo, the auctioneer said reverently. Perry's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. The duel. 2 million. Perry screamed. The room gasped. 2 million for a diary. Brittany tugged on his sleeve. Perry, are you crazy? That's company money. It's an investment, Perry snapped, shrugging her off. If I get this, Kovo has to talk to me. I control the asset. 2 million going once, the auctioneer called. He looked at Kovo. Sir. Kovo smiled. It was a wolfish smile. He slowly lowered his finger. He shook his head. Sold. The auctioneer slammed the gavel. To Mr. Perry Stratford for $2 million. Perry let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He had done it. He had beaten Stefan Kovo. He had the prize. He felt a surge of adrenaline. He raised his glass in a mock toast to Kovo. Kovo didn't look upset. In fact, he started clapping. He stood up and applauded. Meredith stood up too, clapping politely. Then the whole room joined in. Perry puffed out his chest. See, he thought. Respect. I showed them power, and they respect it. A waiter appeared at his elbow with a silver tray and a card reader. Mr. Stratford, if you could settle the deposit. Of course, Perry said. Pulling out the Helix Capital black card, he felt invincible. As the transaction processed, Perry walked toward the front of the room. He wanted to look Kovo in the eye. He wanted to see the defeat. Mr. Kovo, Perry said, approaching the table. It seems I have something you want. Perhaps we can discuss that merger now. Kovo looked at him with genuine delight. Mr. Stratford. Congratulations. A bold purchase. I know you wanted it, Perry gloated. I saw you looking at it. But in business, you have to be decisive. Oh, I didn't want it for myself, Kovo said, his eyes twinkling. I have read it already. Meredith let me study it last week at her laboratory. Perry froze. What? I was bidding, Kovo said, leaning in, to drive the price up. It is for a charity, after all. Charity. Perry felt the floor tilting. Which charity? Meredith stepped forward. She smoothed the silk of her grey dress. The Holloway Foundation for Archival Preservation. Perry stared at her. What? My foundation, Meredith said softly. I donated the book. I found it in a box of junk in London 3 years ago. Bought it for £5. I restored it, authenticated it, and put it up for auction tonight to fund my new wing at the public library. The colour drained from Perry's face so fast, he looked like a corpse. You owned it? Yes, Meredith said. And since you just bought it for $2 million, you have just made the single largest donation to my non-profit in history. Thank you. Perry, that was incredibly generous, especially since you always said my work was worthless. Perry's knees buckled. He grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. He had just paid $2 million of his company's money to his ex-wife. He had bought a book she got for £5. Wait, Perry choked out. I can't. The company won't. Oh, I wouldn't worry about the book, Kovo interjected cheerfully. Since you own it now, and you have no way to preserve it, it will disintegrate in about 5 years, unless you hire an expert to maintain it. Kovo wrapped an arm around Meredith's shoulders. But Meredith is fully booked. By me. At that exact moment, Perry's phone buzzed in his pocket. It buzzed again, and again, a relentless, angry vibration. He looked at the screen. It was the CEO of Helix Capital. Message: why did I just get a fraud alert for $2 million at a charity gala? Call me, now! Perry looked up. The room was blurring. The applause had stopped, replaced by the murmur of 100 conversations. He was no longer the hunter. He was the prey. If you'll excuse us, Meredith said, checking her vintage watch. Stefan and I have a late dinner reservation. We have a lot of history to catch up on." "Goodbye, Perry," Kovo said. "Enjoy the book. It's a fascinating read. It's all about a captain who navigated into a storm because he was too arrogant to look at the map." They walked away, arm in arm, toward the exit. Perry stood there, the $2 million receipt crumped in his sweating hand. Brittany was gone. She had vanished the moment the credit card cleared. He was alone. But the nightmare wasn't over. As he stood there, trying to figure out how to explain this to his boss, a man in a dark suit approached him. He wasn't a waiter. He wore an earpiece. "Mr. Stratford?" the man asked. "Yes," Perry croaked. "I'm with the event security. There is a gentleman outside who would like a word with you. He says he is your fiancé's father." Perry frowned. "I don't have a fiancé. I'm seeing Brittany." "But not Brittany," the guard said. Checking his clipboard, "A Mr. Holloway. He says you insulted his daughter tonight." Perry's blood ran cold. Meredith's maiden name was Holloway. But her father was a retired school teacher, or so Perry had always thought. "Her father is a teacher," Perry whispered. "He's nobody." "Sir," the guard said, looking at Perry with a strange expression. "The man outside is in a Rolls-Royce with diplomatic plates. He isn't a teacher. He's the Earl of Calloway. He says his daughter dropped the title when she married you because she wanted a simple life. But he seems very upset that you called Lady Meredith a nobody." Perry's phone fell from his hand and hit the floor with a crack. The heavy brass doors of the Pierre Hotel didn't just close behind Perry Stratford. They sealed shut like the lid of a coffin, muting the applause and the music of the gala he had just been expelled from. The cool night air of Fifth Avenue hit him like a physical blow, stripping away the adrenaline and leaving only the icy terror of reality. He wasn't walking out to a valet stand to collect his Maybach. He was flanked by two burly security guards who had escorted him to the curb, their grip on his elbows firm enough to bruise a polite, professional way of saying he was being thrown out before the police were involved regarding the irregular spending activity on his corporate card. "Move along, sir," one of the guards said, his voice devoid of the deference Perry was used to. "You can't loiter here." Perry stumbled slightly as they released him. He loosened his bow tie, gasping for air. The city noises, the sirens, the honking taxis, the chatter of tourists assaulted his senses. He felt exposed, naked. He had just spent $2 million he didn't have, essentially embezzling from his firm to buy a diary from his own ex-wife. A sleek, vintage Rolls-Royce Phantom, painted a midnight blue so deep it looked black, was idling at the curb just 10 feet away. Its engine purred with a low, expensive hum that vibrated in Perry's chest. The rear window rolled down with a silent, hydraulic smoothness. Sitting inside, illuminated by the soft amber glow of the car's reading light, was a man Perry recognized, or thought he recognized. He had seen this man a dozen times over the last 10 years. He usually wore a frayed tweed jacket with elbow patches, sitting in a worn armchair in Meredith's small apartment in Queens, drinking cheap-bagged tea and complaining about the MTA. Perry had always called him Archie, the retired history teacher who bored him to tears with rambling stories about the Industrial Revolution. Perry had tolerated him only because he was Meredith's father, a harmless, impoverished old man. But the man in the car wasn't wearing tweed. He was wearing a bespoke tuxedo with peak lapels that fit his frame with military precision. On his lapel sat a small, discreet pin, bearing a crest Perry didn't recognize, a lion rampant holding a quill, encrusted in tiny diamonds. "Get in, Perry," the man said. The voice wasn't the wheezing, rambling tone of a bored pensioner. It was sharp, clipped, and commanded immediate obedience. It was a voice accustomed to silence falling whenever it spoke. Perry, dazed and terrified, didn't argue. He opened the heavy rear door and climbed into the back seat. The door clicked shut, sealing out the noise of New York City instantly. The interior smelled of aged leather, expensive brandy, and old money. "Archie," Perry whispered, his hands trembling as they rested on his knees. What is going on?" The guard said, "You were an earl." The man poured himself a glass of brandy from the car's crystal decanter, his movements deliberate and graceful. He didn't offer Perry a glass. "Archibald Holloway," the man corrected, looking at the amber liquid rather than at Perry. "The 14th Earl of Calloway, though, for the last decade, I have simply been Meredith's father to you, a role I played because she asked me to, a role I played because she loved you." Perry's mind raced, the gears grinding against the rust of his own prejudices. But the teaching job, the Queen's apartment, the coupons, you're rich, you're royalty. Why did she live like that? Why did she let me believe she was nobody? Archibald finally turned his head. His eyes were terrifyingly similar to Meredith's, intelligent, piercing, and currently filled with a profound, icy disappointment. "Because she wanted to be loved." "You fool," Archibald said quietly. The insult was delivered with such calm precision, it felt like a diagnosis. Archibald took a sip of brandy. Meredith grew up in a world where everyone wanted something from her, her title, her inheritance, her connections. She has been courted by dukes and heirs to shipping fortune since she was 16. They didn't see her. They saw the keys to the Calloway estate. When she met you at university, she thought she had finally found someone who didn't know who she was. She thought she found a builder, a man of ambition who wanted to create a life with her, not off of her. Perry felt a wave of nausea. He remembered the arguments. He remembered screaming at her for buying generic brand pasta to save 50 cents. He remembered telling her she had no vision. She refused her trust fund, Archibald continued, his voice tightening. She refused the title. She wanted to prove she could make it on her own, on a librarian's salary, with her husband. She wanted the struggle. She thought it was romantic. She thought you were romantic. I wanted the best for us, Perry stammered, his defense sounding weak even to his own ears. "No," Archibald snapped, the veneer of politeness cracking for a second. "You wanted the best for you. You saw a cardigan and assumed nobody. You saw a book and assumed trash. You never once looked past the surface. And tonight you tried to humiliate her in front of the very people she grew up with." Archibald leaned forward, the shadows in the car deepening the lines on his face. "Do you know who Stefan Kovo is?" "Perry." He's a billionaire. He's the target," Perry whispered. "He is her godfather," Archibald revealed. Perry's eyes went wide. The breath caught in his throat. "He and I were at Oxford together," Archibald said, swirling his glass. "Who do you think taught Meredith to value history? Who do you think taught her to read Latin and Greek before she could ride a bicycle? Stefan has been trying to get her to leave you for years. He saw what you were, a hollow suit with a loud voice. But Meredith is loyal to a fault. She defended you. She said you were just stressed. She said you had potential. She told Stefan that underneath your vanity. There was a good man. Archibald let out a short, dry laugh. She finally gave up on you 3 years ago. And look what happened the moment she cut the anchor. She bloomed. She is the most respected woman in her field. She advises governments. She protects history. And you, Archibald's eyes swept over Perry's disheveled suit. You are a man who just spent $2 million he doesn't have on a book he doesn't understand to impress a man who despises him. Perry buried his face in his hands. The enormity of his mistake was crushing him. He had been sleeping next to a queen for 10 years and treated her like a peasant. At that exact moment, Perry's phone buzzed in his pocket. It buzzed again. And again. A relentless, angry vibration against his thigh. He pulled it out. The screen lit up with the name of the CEO of Helix Capital. "You should answer that," Archibald said, signaling the driver. The car began to move, gliding away from the curb. "I believe your career is about to end. Meredith asked me not to intervene, to let you fall on your own sword. I admit, I found it difficult. I wanted to destroy you years ago, but I couldn't resist seeing the look on your face when you realized that you threw away a diamond to chase a piece of glass." The car stopped a block away from the Helix Capital building. It was a short ride, but it felt like a journey between 2 different dimensions. "Wait," Perry pleaded, grabbing the door handle, his knuckles white. "Archie Lord Calloway, please. I can fix this. I can apologize. Talk to Meredith. If she takes me back, if she just speaks to Kovo." Archibald laughed. It was a cold, final sound, like a gavel striking a block. "She's currently dining with Stefan Kovo and the director of the Louvre at a private table," Archibald said. "They are discussing the new Holloway wing. They are discussing the future. You are not invited. Perry, you never were. You just crashed the party for 10 years, and security has finally caught up with you." The door opened. One of Archibald's bodyguards, who had been following in a trailing SUV, opened the door and physically pulled Perry out of the car. "Goodbye, Mr. Stratford," Archibald said, turning back to his brandy. The door slammed shut. The Rolls-Royce peeled away, disappearing into the river of traffic, a phantom in the night. Perry Stratford was left standing in the gutter, the cold wind biting through his suit, holding a phone that was vibrating with his termination notice. He stood there for a long time, watching the taillights fade, realizing that for the first time in his life, he was exactly what he had feared most. He was a nobody. 6 months later. The fluorescent lights of the Daily Grind coffee shop on 42nd Street hummed with a headache-inducing frequency, a stark contrast to the soft, golden ambiance of the boardrooms Perry Stratford used to command. The air here didn't smell of mahogany or expensive cologne. It smelled of burnt milk, stale pastries, and the damp, metallic scent of a mop bucket that hadn't been changed since the morning rush. Perry wiped down a sticky table near the window, his movements heavy and sluggish. He wore a uniform that consisted of a polo shirt that was 2 sizes too small and a lime green apron that felt like a neon sign of his surrender. His bespoke suits, the armor he had worn for a decade, had been sold off to a consignment shop in the village to pay for his bankruptcy lawyer. "Hey, table 4 needs sugar, and the bathroom code isn't working again." The voice belonged to the shift manager, a 19-year-old college dropout named Kyle who had a nose ring and a distinct lack of organizational skills. 6 months ago, Perry wouldn't have hired Kyle to shine his shoes. Today, Kyle held the power to dock Perry's pay. On it, Kyle, Perry muttered, his voice raspy. He hadn't spoken at a normal volume in weeks. There was no one to talk to. The fall had been absolute. The Helix Capital legal team had been ruthless. They hadn't just fired him, they had incinerated his reputation. The lawsuit for gross negligence and unauthorized use of corporate assets had drained his savings, his stock portfolio, and his dignity. He had been blacklisted from every financial institution on the East Coast. When the news broke that he had tried to buy a diary with company money to impress his ex-wife's billionaire godfather, his friends vanished like smoke. Brittany had blocked his number before the gala valet even brought his car around. Now, he was a 40-year-old barista trainee in a city that worshipped youth and success. He was a ghost haunting the very streets he used to rule. Perry finished wiping the table and tossed the grey rag into the sanitizer bucket. His hands were red and chapped from the chemicals. He checked the clock on the wall. 2 o'clock M. Break time. He retreated to the break room, a claustrophobic closet stacked high with boxes of napkins and syrup bottles. He sat on an overturned milk crate, his knees popping, and pulled out his phone. It was a cracked, prepaid Android model, a humbling replacement for his latest iPhone. He knew he shouldn't do it. It was a form of psychological self-harm. But he couldn't stop. He opened the news app. He didn't even have to scroll. The headline was the banner story, splashed across every major business and culture outlet in the world. The billion-dollar historian Meredith Holloway and Stefan Kovo unveil the lost library in Geneva. Perry's thumb hovered over the screen, trembling slightly. He tapped the video link. The grainy screen of his cheap phone filled with an image of pristine, high-definition luxury. The camera panned over Lake Geneva, the water sparkling like crushed diamonds under the Swiss sun. In the background rose a magnificent structure of glass and steel, modern, airy, and imposing. And there, standing on a podium in front of a crowd of dignitaries, was Meredith. Perry felt the air leave his lungs. She looked unrecognizable, yet more herself than she had ever been. Gone was the beige cardigan he had despised. Gone was the hesitation in her posture. She was wearing a structured white suit that looked like it had been sculpted rather than sewn. Her hair was loose, catching the wind, framing a face that radiated a calm, terrifying power. She didn't look like a woman who restored old books anymore. She looked like a woman who wrote history. Standing next to her, looking at her with the pride of a father, was Stefan Kovo. A reporter from the BBC thrust a microphone toward the podium. Ms. Holloway, this project is being hailed as the most significant cultural preservation effort of the 21st century. For years, you worked in the shadows. What motivated you to step into such a public light now? Meredith leaned into the microphone. Her eyes, magnified on the screen, seemed to stare directly through the camera lens and into the cramped break room in Midtown Manhattan. For a long time, I was told that my work didn't matter, Meredith said, her voice steady and melodious. I was told that value is determined by the stock market, by the skyline, by the noise you make. I was told that if you aren't fighting for attention, you're a nobody. Perry flinched. The word hung in the air, sharp as a knife. But I learned a hard lesson. Meredith continued, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. I learned that the loudest people in the room are often the emptiest. True power isn't about being seen. It's about seeing what others miss. The past has value. Integrity has value. And sometimes you have to clear away the dust and the dead weight to find the gold underneath. The crowd erupted in applause. Kovo clapped her on the back, leaning in to say something that made Meredith laugh a free, joyous sound Perry realized he had never heard during their marriage. "One final question," the reporter shouted over the applause. "Is it true that the Holloway Foundation has recently acquired a substantial property in New York for your U.S. operations? Rumor has it you bought the penthouse at the Obsidian Tower." Perry's blood ran cold. The Obsidian Tower. That was his building. That was his penthouse. The one he had been forced to sell at a loss to pay the lawyers. The apartment where he had told Meredith she wasn't good enough to stand on the balcony. Yes. Meredith nodded, her expression turning serious. It's a beautiful space with a lovely view, but the energy there was wrong. It was too cold, too sterile. She paused, and Perry felt the walls of the break room closing in. "We gutted it last week," Meredith said simply. "We tore out the marble and the mirrors. It's currently being renovated into a reading room and literacy center for underprivileged children. We're filling it with books. We're turning a monument to ego into a sanctuary for learning." The video cut to a montage of the proposed designs. Perry saw his former living room, the room where he had hosted cocktail parties to impress clients, now filled with beanbag chairs, colorful murals, and bookshelves. Perry dropped the phone. It clattered against the concrete floor, the screen cracking further. She hadn't just moved on. She hadn't just succeeded. She had taken the symbols of his vanity and repurposed them for charity. She had literally erased his footprint from the city. He sat there, staring at the blank wall, the hum of the refrigerator behind him growing louder. He remembered his cruel words to her at Le Bernardin. "In my world, if you aren't noticed, you don't exist." The irony was a physical weight in his chest. He was the one who had ceased to exist. He was a footnote in her biography. The dead weight she had cleared away to find the gold. Perry front counter. Now. Kyle's voice snapped him back to the grey reality. Perry stood up slowly. His knees ached. He picked up his phone, shoved it into his pocket, and walked out to the register. A customer was waiting. She was a woman in her early 30s, dressed in a sharp navy suit, tapping a manicured fingernail against the granite counter. She wore a Bluetooth headset and was deep in conversation, not even acknowledging Perry's presence. "Hello," Perry said, his voice hollow. "What can I get for you?" The woman held up a finger to silence him, listening to someone on the other end of her call. "No, I don't care what his excuse is," she said into her headset, her tone biting and familiar. "He's not delivering. He's weak. Listen to me. Mark, we need sharks. If he can't handle the pressure, cut him loose. He's a nobody. We need someone with ambition." Perry froze. The words echoed through him, bouncing off the cheap tile and the glass display case. He's a nobody. The woman finally looked at him, her eyes scanning over his green apron, his tired face, his greying hair. She looked right through him, seeing nothing but a service object. "Medium latte, oat milk, no foam," she barked, turning her attention back to her phone. "And make it fast. I have a meeting with the board." "That will be $6, Perry whispered. She tapped her black titanium credit card against the reader, the same card he used to have. The machine beeped. She grabbed her cup without a thank you and turned on her heel, her heels clicking rhythmically on the floor as she marched out the door to conquer the world. Perry Stratford stood there, his hand hovering over the cash register. He watched her go. disappearing into the sea of people on 42nd Street, he realized, with a terrifying clarity, that he was looking at a mirror image of his past self. And he realized that in the story of his own life. He was no longer the protagonist. He was just the help. And somewhere in Geneva, the woman he called a nobody was wearing a crown. Perry Stratford spent a decade chasing gold, never realizing he was married to the mine. He judged Meredith by the cover, mocking her silence for weakness and her humility for poverty. In the end, his arrogance didn't just cost him his job or his fortune, it cost him the realization that the most powerful people in the room are often the ones who don't need to shout. Perry wanted to be a king of New York, but he ended up serving coffee to the very people he tried to impress, while the woman he discarded reshaped history. If you enjoyed this story of instant karma and sweet revenge, please smash that like button. It helps the channel grow and lets us know you want more stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a daily dose of drama. What would you have done if you were Meredith? Let us know in the comments below.